Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. We begin the first program of 2021 by casting an eye on the dismal situation of rights in India. Post-colonial states continue to grapple with diverse ethnic, linguistics, and religious fault lines. We have witnessed that in Pakistan. India too has seen much of that violence since independence. But today's India is different in one central respect. The majoritarian Hindutva project is not about the fringe. It is a central plank of the Indian government under Narendra Modi. 3 days ago, a cleric instigated a mob in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province to desecrate a Hindu samadhi. Both the central and provincial governments immediately took notice of the event. The cleric and some of his henchmen were arrested, and the provincial government has already allocated funds to restore the samadhi. Earlier, the Supreme Court of Pakistan had ordered the protection of the samadhi. Previously, when India saw riots, the governments usually moved to punish the culprits. In today's India, even the Indian Supreme Court has not covered itself in glory. Its judgment on Babri Mosque was not its best moment, and its continued delay in deciding the petitions against the revocation of Article 370, which gave nominal autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir, a disputed territory, is another instance of its pussyfooting around an issue that deals with the future of more than 80 million people. The central and state governments have done even worse, ignoring vigilante actions by RSS and other Sangh mobs against minorities. The party even gave tickets in the 2019 elections to some convicted right-wingers. All in all, it has been a mess, and the slide continues, even as the BJP government continues to market India as a shining project. But let's get right to our panel tonight and talk about more specific issues that beset India. I am joined by Dr. Ritumbra Manuive, Executive Director of Foundation London Story and lecturer in international law, and Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, Assistant Professor of Modern South Asian History and Director, Center for Governance and Policy at Information Technology University. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Dr. Manuive here. The problem, as I said, is that when we talk about post-colonial states, there are problems. We have seen those problems in Pakistan, as I mentioned in my opening. But the thing that unfortunately is now setting India apart is the fact that there is the central government and the state governments that seem to actually sponsor or at least ignore the vigilante action done by Sangh and RSS mobs. Now, that is something that obviously is far more problematic than simply mobs getting up and doing something and then governments, of course, taking note of that. Is that an assessment that you would agree with?
So I would say that it's not exactly that we can't exactly for sure say that the governments are funding these mobs or something, but yes, they are ignoring the problem, and that itself is a major issue, that the governments are not doing enough to control the mob, because at the end of the day, you have the Constitution of India and you have your rights enshrined over there. The police has the power, the state governments have the responsibility to act if such mob situations happen and the minority rights are getting affected and the minority communities are getting affected. So at the end of the day, question is not as much about whether the state is being complicit, but rather whether the state is doing enough to protect the minorities that it is also responsible for.
Right. I understand. When I said sponsor, I didn't particularly mean funding. But for instance, there are lots of critics within India who talk about the fact that sometimes the states have been complicit, or at least sections of the state. For instance, the Gujarat pogrom of 2002 is one of those events that come to one's mind. Similarly, the Congress government, when there were the Delhi riots against the Sikhs, there is criticism of the fact that in that particular instance, there were leaders within the Congress who actually allowed this to happen. So I was basically, approaching the issue from that perspective. Now, is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, I would, because in all of these cases, the state did have the responsibility to protect, which it did not deliver to the best of its ability. Because in a district, when there is district administration and there's a right situation, the district commissioner, the police, there they have an absolute authority to intervene in the situation, and they don't need to wait for a high command order or wait for a political order to come in or something like that. So why hasn't the state done that is always a question. And we have seen in the past that how the political interference has also been there with these executive orders or executive functioning, and that is definitely problematic.
Right. I also mentioned the Indian Supreme Court. Would you, since you are a legal person, would you consider some of the recent judgments of the Indian Supreme Court as verdicts that are rightly questioned by legal experts?
So yes, like as far as the Barbary Masjid judgment goes, I have a different point of view on that, because it was not really decided on merits or basically a judgment even for that matter. It was more of a conciliation arbitration order which was accepted by the court. So it wasn't really a merit decision, but rather an acceptance given by the court that, okay, the two parties have decided what they have decided.
Okay.
So in that sense, it is a little, the legality is different over there. But yes, the whole process took a very long time, from 1992 to 2000. Now 2000 basically it was a very long drawn battle, and we have seen, and there has been a lot of research which has actually gone into to say how the whole investigation process itself was vitiated at times, and it wasn't there were complexities in there, and there are enough records on that. There's enough academic record as well as otherwise from the civil society records on that.
Right. Now, before I get to Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, there have been these clashes in a Muslim-dominated village in Indore district of Madhya Pradesh. This was, began after Hindu groups, members participating in a rally stopped in front of a mosque and chanted slogans while Muslims were praying inside. And this led to violent incidents. Then there was a video of the incident that has gone viral on social media. It shows a group of men holding saffron flags and chanting Jai Shri Ram, which means Hail Lord Rama. Slogans have climbed atop the mosque and tried to damage a minaret in the presence of the police. Anyway, let's get to Dr. Yaqoob Bangash. Yaqoob, you've done a book on Pakistan Supreme Court. You are also a very close observer, and I believe you're probably thinking of writing a book on the Indian Supreme Court also. So let's begin with that. Do you feel sort of disappointed with some of the recent verdicts of the Indian Supreme Court?
Yes, very, very much so. The Indian Supreme Court had been kind of a leading light in the common law jurisdictions around the world. And in fact, the whole spate of public interest litigation that came up in the 1980s, and the whole idea of like suo motu litigation, all of that really was pioneered to a large extent by the Indian Supreme Court. And that really changed the way in which the courts kind of, dealt with these public issues that came through it, either through its own notice or through people who were affected by it, and then it understood them within this very large framework of fundamental rights, which had really, to that extent, never been done in any common law jurisdiction. And in fact, the Pakistani courts picked it up from the Indian courts. So, keeping that background in mind from the 90s, 80s onwards, it is quite sad and in fact disheartening that, in the last couple of years, the Indian Supreme Court has actually become kind of, for the lack of a better word, handmaiden of the government. And it now kowtows to anything that the government wants. And now it's even, so sad that you can even predict what it is going to do. You mentioned earlier the Indian Supreme Court's reluctance to take up the cases against the abolition of the Kashmir provisions, kind of everyone knew that, because everyone knew that the Indian Supreme Court is not going to stand up to the majoritarianism of Modi. And that's exactly what's happened. In that sense, when the Babri Masjid judgment came, no one was really surprised, because they knew that it is coming under Modi and it will be against the basic principles of justice. So it is quite a shame that the Indian Supreme Court, that had been actually doing such good work, has now been actually relegated to this junior position, not as an arm of governance, but as a junior member, perhaps, of the BJP RSS combine that is now ruling India. So I think it's quite a dramatic thing. With that, let me add that I think one of the most important things that has happened under Modi's rule in India has been this huge paradigm shift in India. When the Indian Constituent Assembly was debating the making of its constitution from 1946 to 1950, the major thing that the fathers of the Indian constitutions did was that they moved, they premised the Indian constitution in this rights-based platform. So the Indian constitution, in order to ensure that majoritarianism never kinds of comes to the fore, was premised in this idea of rules, this idea of fundamental rights, and those were there to protect all the minorities. And that was the great achievement of the Indian Constitution, that it was now a rule and rights-based constitution rather than a majority-based constitution. That was the fundamental difference that it made. And what's happened under Modi, and the whole Supreme Court debacle in that sense makes a lot more sense, is the unraveling of this rules and rights-based constitution to now a majoritarian-based constitution and a majoritarian-based government in India.
Right, that's a very significant point. Let me take this to Dr. Manuive. Dr. Manuive, this discrepancy, now not in letter, because the Constitution and its letter is still there, but in terms of the politics of it and in terms of the spirit of it, India seems to be moving further and further away from what the founding fathers thought was the right sort of constitutional premise or compact for the country.
Yes, so if you can see the historically, the BJP and the mother organization of BJP, RSS itself, has been diametrically opposed to the ideas of Indian Constitution, that India as a nation and the path that it should take into the future as well. So this is something that we have seen at different stages, starting from the killing of Mahatma Gandhi to how diametrically opposed it is to the Congress party itself, or to any sort of a left ecosystem of India, how dramatically opposed BJP has been to that. And this is just a furtherance of what RSS has always stood for, that it has stood for a Hindu nation, a Hindutva Wadi laws, perhaps a Manuvad, which is somewhere down the line possible if BJP continues to achieve what it has been achieving with the majority masses. And it is just very unfortunate, because in the entire South Asia, India was, as also my co-panelist said, India was actually a leading light, and it was actually a country to look up to, saying that, even as the largest democracy in the world, we were very proud of the fact that it is very diverse, it is very plural, and, it upholds the liberty, the fundamental rights, and the constitution. But we have seen this sink in India over the last couple of years, and this sink, we don't know how further down it's going to go, and that is very complicated. That is a very complex thing in the future. That how far does the BJP is willing to go to dismantle the Indian Constitution? We have also seen the dismantling of Indian Constitution during the Indira Gandhi time in a different way. But what is happening now is perhaps the creation of a Hindu state, which is just unfortunate.
Right. So that brings us to another question. Now, one of your flanks is covered because fortunately, you're, in the context of India, fortunately, you're a Hindu. But there is another flank of yours which is not very secure, and that is that you're a woman. Now, as an educated woman, is that something that concerns you?
Well, to be honest, not really, because I'm also a very privileged, educated Hindu woman. And I am just at the fortunate side of the club, perhaps, to be in that position of being educated and fortunate enough that I'm not that scared of the Hindutva gang or the patriarchal structures around it. But I should say this, that it's not. The patriarchy itself has always been a problem. So we cannot say that this is perhaps happening right now. It's perhaps more in your face right now, but it has always been there, and not just in India, but the entire South Asia, even beyond. Right? We as a spectator are able to watch it more closely now, but it hasn't changed. It is still the same patriarchal norms, the same patriarchal culture, the same infanticides, feticides for the woman, not lack of education for the woman, lack of opportunity for the woman, and it is still there. And the state can perhaps be a bit more, ignorant about it, or just pretend that nothing is happening.
I take your point. I take your point. So the thrust of my question had more to do with the fact, not ignoring the fact that patriarchy has been an unfortunate part of the culture in the subcontinent, but more to do with the fact that with the kind of rise of this Hindutva right-wing sort of RSS creed, do you think it's going to get worse? And I also understand that you personally are privileged, but millions of women are perhaps not that privileged.
See, when we are studying the online spaces of where these, radical Hindutvaism is flourishing really much these days, we are looking at sort of the same projection from the society into the online spaces as well. So where in the society, men were the ones who were having a voice, where men were the ones who were actually raising the chants, for example, and going out killing and leading the mobs. It is the same thing that you're also seeing now in the social media, and also again the projection of the male power is pretty much out there. The male leadership is pretty much out there, and it hasn't really changed. It's just more in your face now because it's right there in your phone now. The spaces are more male occupied, and it has always been that.
Right. At that point, thank you so much. That was Dr. Ritumbra Manuive speaking with us. Let me go back to Dr. Yaqoob Bangash. Yaqoob, similar points with reference to the minorities and also with reference to the disadvantaged groups like women. I mean, this whole business of love jihad is essentially a male perspective about the so-called, in this case, honor of the Hindu woman. Give us a sense of, this entire landscape with reference to this.
Jas, I think to a certain extent, of course, we can even let go of, this male-female thing or even majority-minority thing, because I think the way the Hindutva creed operates, it's actually eventually going to affect and badly affect everyone in India. So at the moment, they are attacking Muslims, but, let's not forget, a while ago, the Hindutva mobs were burning churches. And if you remember that in Gujarat, hundreds of churches were built, were burned. A lot of Christians were actually killed, and then they came after the Muslims. And very soon it will be other religions. It will be Sikhs. Look at what's happening in India now concerning the farmers. Most of them are actually Sikhs who are protesting on the streets of Delhi. So all minorities are going to be affected, and very clearly and in very clear terms. In that sense, males and females are going to be affected. So they are going to kill males, attack them, rape women, not give them opportunities that exist in India. So it's going to generally affect that. Once the minorities have been kind of dealt with, so to speak, this ideology will turn towards those people who call themselves Hindu but are not Hindu properly. So the lower caste or the disadvantaged amongst the Hindus, then they are going to be targeted, and then they are going to be made into proper Hindus, the way this RSS ideology wants them to be. And eventually it is going to therefore, I would argue, affect everyone. Yes, the extremely privileged ones, the people at the top might not get directly influenced, but they will begin to self-censor themselves. I already know a lot of people in India who are highly educated, highly placed, highly privileged, who dare not say anything against the Modi government, because if you're a businessman, you might lose a contract. If you are an educator and if you are a university professor, you might be kicked out of the university or be censured. So even the privileged will have repercussions, and actually are having repercussions. And I think that is why we need to be very careful of this ideology. It is really, a lot of people do compare this to Nazism, but actually that's a very good comparison, because the way National Socialism began in Germany, this is exactly the way Hindutva has begun in India. It has found an entry through certain grievances, some true, some made up, a lot of them in a hyperbole, and once they get to power, slowly and in a very legalistic way, they tend to close doors. Like, I'm sure you remember the way Nazi Germany dealt with the Jews. It made a law against them. It made it legal. In the same way, what is happening in Kashmir, technically speaking, it's all legal, because the Indian state passes a law to actually cage all those Kashmiris. Now, that's not sensible or according to the principles of natural justice at all, but that's how these kind of fascist ideologies get away with things. And if you remember that the Nuremberg trials actually used natural justice as their meter, and then said, we are not going to look at the examples of Nazi soldiers who actually said, well, we were just following the law. Because no, laws can be unjust. Majoritarian countries can push unjust laws upon their minorities. And when that comes, the principles of natural justice are supposed to be followed. And this is what Hindutva is actually doing. They're ignoring principles of natural justice, of equality, of fraternity, and of equal opportunity. And regardless of what your religion is, and I think that's the key point here, regardless of what your religion is, regardless of what your gender is in India, eventually all of them will be affected, and badly affected. And therefore, I think it is high time that there needs to be a movement in India to counter this, because my real scare is that in about a decade or so, this would have seeped so deeply in India. So this will get so entrenched in India that it'll be very hard to get rid of it. And that's the real scare, that progressive forces, or even just Indian nationalist forces, just in a couple of weeks, India will observe the death anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. These are the very people who actually killed Gandhi. These are the very people who are against his ideology of India.
Yeah,
so
that's what. Yeah, I know. That's what Dr. Manuive was also saying a short while ago. But I'm also joined by Mr. Ravi Srivastava, who's a political analyst. Mr. Srivastava, thank you as always for being on the program. We're talking about the fact that post-colonial states, all post-colonial states have had their, difficulties, fault lines, linguistic, ethnic, religious. We've seen that in Pakistan. But what we are, and India has also seen it since independence, but what is different under Mr. Modi is the fact that what was considered as a fringe is now the central plank of the BJP's policy. Give us some sense of how you look at that.
I was just listening to the prior analyst, Dr. Bangash, and I have heard a lot of things which are very relevant about India. The fact is that the record of human rights, fundamental rights, constitutional rights, the rights given by the law, the record in India is decimal at the moment. Since Mr. Modi took over in the year 2014, we have seen a constant, a regular decline in the human rights activities. You must have seen the pictures. There are farmers who are sitting in right at the capital of the country for last 40 days in the biting cold and protesting against some draconian black bill called Farmers Bill, which is going to take away their rights, their land, their crop, and their livelihood. One more thing I want to tell you, that the record started getting decimated from Kashmir. On 5th of August 2019, the government repealed that, abrogated that Article 370 and Section 35A. As a result, the internet was withdrawn, all kind of atrocities, people were locked down in their houses, they had no communication, lot of encounters happening in the name, there are no explanations for that. All kind of human rights violations were happening over there. And one more thing, let me tell you, that this is not happening against one minority community. This is happening against practically everyone. You have seen the Sikhs who are sitting on the border. You have seen the Christians. There is a priest, Father Stan Swami, who has been booked being a Maoist, rotting here in a Bombay jail for last 2 years. And he is 83 years old. The gentleman required proper blanket, a sipper and all, a sipper and a straw, because he suffers from Parkinson's disease. He was not provided even that. You have heard about Dr. Kafil Khan, who saved several lives in the BRD Medical College in Gorakhpur. And he was booked for the charges which were not substantiated even. And he rotted in the jail for 9 months. The Honorable High Court said that how a state can put this kind of a flimsy charge and send a person to jail for such a long time. You must be hearing a lot about anti-conversion law or love jihad in India. There are 3-4 states who have already passed a resolution in favor of that. It's another blatant violation of the human rights in India. The freedom which is provided by nothing other than the constitution written by Baba Saheb Ambedkar is being violated. You cannot marry as per your wish. You cannot fall in love with any person with the person of your choice of the other religion. I mean, those kind of draconian laws. And who is responsible? Let me tell you frankly, there is one person who is squarely responsible for this, who is a fountainhead of this communal hatred in India, is none other than our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi. I have heard one of his remarks in which he says, the people, the Reuters, they are recognized by their attire. I mean, how a person can stoop so low that, the dress will determine that this man is a Dangai, or this man is a Reuter, or this man is an activist. Such are the views of our Prime Minister, and the agenda is being pursued vigorously by the fringe elements across the country. They demolish the worshipping places, they go against the religious practices of the other religion, and there is absolutely intolerance against the minority community everywhere across the country. So I would say that the human rights violations in India have become the order of the day, and I think unless this government is changed, I think this is not going to improve. We have been living peacefully in this country for last 60-65 years, but then last 5 years have been the worst for the India, and all kind of communal divide is appearing across the nation.
Absolutely. That was a very brave, bold statement, Mr. Srivastava. Before I wrap up, very quickly, Yaqoob Bangash, is there anything you want to add to what Mr. Srivastava said?
Yes, Ejaz. I just wanted to very quickly add that, I've been talking about the internal situation in India, and I think one needs to also see it in the international context. It is not as if that the Modi government has actually achieved anything in terms of the economy. The economy is in a bad shape. Even before the coronavirus, it was really bad and on the decline. And internationally, has Modi actually achieved anything for India? Is India a member of the UN Security Council? No, it's not. Well, now it's become the amongst the rotating non-permanent members, but has it got a permanent seat? Is it actually more respected now in the International Committee of Nations? No, it's not. Every single international human rights agency now consistently writes against India, which was not the case 10 years ago. So even internationally, Modi has shamed India. Internationally, any plans that the RSS had or the BJP had have failed. In the US, they actually supported Trump. Now he's out of power. In other countries, they had these political ambitions, and they're all receding now. And I think the writing is really on the wall that throughout the world, this great projection of India has really failed. So it's failed inside India, it has failed outside India, and it is only destroying India. And I think that is the last thing that one needs to remember and really work towards countering this now.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Yaqoob Bangash. Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi Srivastava. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a tweet by outgoing U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo regarding the situation in Afghanistan. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Let's get to our second story. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in a tweet on 2nd January, lauded the outgoing Trump administration's Afghanistan policy. And I quote from his tweet, "No U.S. servicemen have been killed in Afghanistan in almost a year, and Afghans are finally discussing peace and reconciliation among themselves. Such incredible progress," unquote. He went on to say, and once again I'm quoting from his tweet, "Every administration since Bush 43 wanted to draw down U.S. troops and forge peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. We did it. Don't just take my word for it." And that's the end of the tweet. And for good measure, he attached a clip of former U.S. President Barack Obama with his tweet. Let me play that clip for you before we move further.
There will be difficult days ahead. The enormous sacrifices of our men and women are not over. But tonight I'd like to tell you how we will complete our mission and end the war in Afghanistan. First, we've begun a transition to Afghan responsibility for security. Already nearly half of the Afghan people live in places where Afghan security forces are moving into the lead. This month, at a NATO summit in Chicago, our coalition will set a goal for Afghan forces to be in the lead for combat operations across the country next year. International troops will continue to train, advise, and assist the Afghans and fight alongside them when needed. But we will shift into a support role as Afghans step forward. As we do, our troops will be coming home.
Pompeo finally capped his Afghanistan tweets with this. And again, I quote, "Our mission in Afghanistan is to eliminate al-Qaeda and threats to the American homeland. Don't need tens of thousands of U.S. troops on the ground to do that. We have partners, brave Afghans, NATO forces. We also have the ability to project power from afar," unquote. His tweets got a pushback, with some responding by saying that the level of violence in Afghanistan has continued to rise. In fact, as we said on this program last week, in the months of November and December last year, there have been a spate of targeted killings of journalists and civil society activists. That trend has continued, unfortunately. On 2nd January, a 5th Afghan journalist was target killed in the central province of Ghor. To discuss Pompeo's claims and the situation on the ground, I'm joined by Kugelman, who's Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center, and Mariam Wardak, who's an Afghan journalist and political activist. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Michael here. Michael, you responded to Pompeo by tweeting, and I'm quoting from your tweet. What he says here, as in Pompeo says here, is technically true, but it's what he doesn't say. For example, the out-of-control deadly violence, both on and off the battlefield, raging across Afghanistan amid a U.S. withdrawal. that underscores just how tone deaf of a message this will come across to most Afghans. Now, Michael, I perfectly hear you, but you also begin by saying that technically he is correct. And then, as I said, with a second tweet, he actually put a clip of Barack Obama. So give me a sense of, and you know, I understand where you're coming from, but what are the choices here?
Well, you know, in credit to Pompeo, it is indeed true that this is the administration that managed to set in motion a peace process. I think that one cannot deny that, even harsh critics of this administration. There were opportunities in the past. The Obama administration, perhaps, for example, had an opportunity. But you know, what made things different with the Trump administration is that it was willing to accede to the Taliban demand to hold direct bilateral negotiations with the Taliban. And the Obama administration had been unwilling to do that because it had wanted to have Kabul in the room. So indeed, Pompeo was right. And there have not been any combat deaths, any American combat deaths this year. And I agree with you, Ijaz, that there was no other choice, that I think that it was quite clear to this administration that there was no military solution to the war, and that the U.S. policy in Afghanistan had been so poor that there was really no other viable plan than to try to launch a peace process in order to set in motion a process where the U.S. could stage a respectable withdrawal. But the problem is, as I highlighted in the tweet, what's happened over the last year just looks very bad, I think, from many lenses, because you know, the U.S. is planning for a withdrawal at a moment when the violence is intensifying to levels that have not been seen in such a long time. And I think that is the concern. So it's not going to be a responsible, respectful withdrawal. And to conclude, this administration is essentially kicking the can down the road in terms of what's left with the small number of U.S. troops that will be in place when the next administration takes over. There's going to be a very small number of troops in place, 2,500, the lowest number since 2002, I believe, in many years. And so the Biden administration will have a very tough decision to make about that. So credit to Pompeo and his administration for setting in motion a peace process and keeping U.S. troops out of harm's way. But there's a lot more to what's going on than what he highlighted in a tweet that was really meant for U.S. domestic consumption. It was not meant for an Afghan audience. It was meant to trumpet U.S. accomplishments. So it makes sense that he would highlight what he did. But it's just a real mess on the ground in Afghanistan right now.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Michael. And on that, let me pull in Mariam Wardak here. Mariam, I did a program, as I mentioned in my opening also last week, in which we specifically talked about, I mean, this has been happening, it's not a new trend, but it's kind of, you know, paced up, if you will, of targeted killings of journalists and civil society activists. And unfortunately, this trend is terrible and worrisome, because these are the very people who Afghanistan would need as it, moves towards a transition. Give me your sense of this new trend, and how do you think this is sort of, or who exactly is responsible for this?
When you have target killings, no group takes responsibility. And in most cases, when it's a female who is assassinated, it somehow is linked to some sort of family matters. There was a great civil activist named Farishta Kohistani who was killed alongside her brother 1 hour outside of Kabul. Unofficially, I have been informed by several government officers that the next 120 days are the most sensitive, especially for female activists, and one should be very weary about their whereabouts. This is extremely concerning. It's going to increase the continued brain drain as people are going to take refuge in other countries versus stay in Afghanistan. The fact that there is not that war is a great aspect, but we knew who were fighting before. But ever since the talks have happened and the 5,000 prisoners were released, there seems to be an increase in target killing and an increase in high-tech magnetic bombs. there's multiple people that we should hold fingers to. One, the Americans, as the fact that, yes, you brought us to the negotiation table, but you seem to have put the risk of all Afghans, and it's not the graveyards of empires anymore, it's the graveyard of Afghans that are at risk. Yes, you're pulling out, but we are in this situation because you decided to invade Afghanistan in 2001. The next group that we would like to point fingers at is the insurgents themselves, the Afghans who are taking part, whether the Afghan Taliban or they're the Afghan members of ISIS or the criminals, because there is an increase in criminality in Afghanistan. What are you doing in benefiting killing your own people? It's literally a massacre every day. The third people that should be held responsible is the Afghan government. I see that there are no repercussions for target killings. The Minister of Interior continues to do his job as nothing has happened and seems to be extremely apologetic when there's a target killing. The head of intelligence is not being held responsible. And there seems to be homes in Kabul where there are explosives made. Just recently, the National Defense Security has caught about 8 massive explosives in a home in Kabul. How do these individuals come into Kabul when we have such high doubled security in the capital? So with all this being said, Afghan youth, Afghan citizens, Afghan diasporans are all interested in leaving Afghanistan and not staying any further. Who are we leaving them to? To the people who are continuing to take the war forward.
Now that is, thank you for making these points, very valid points. Now that is the real concern. I mean, if there's going to be a brain drain, then what kind of Afghanistan are we looking at? But your point about the Afghan government and the intelligence agencies. Now, the Afghan Interior Minister is on record as having said to the journalists that they should take care of their own security. And if they cannot, then they should stay at home. Now, if that is the message the government is sending out, then what are the private citizens going to do?
What they're going to do is leave the country. And I think that it's extremely responsible for the head of security institution to bring down the morale of the Afghans who have brought attention of the international community to Afghanistan. If it wasn't for these brave Afghan journalists who continue to highlight the insecurity in Afghanistan and risk their lives on a daily basis, then I believe that the Minister of Interior wouldn't have been receiving the highlights and the prestige that he's receiving across the world, because it is these people that are putting their lives at risk to bring attention to these issues. The international community, if exposure in Afghanistan weakens or lessens, then the international community will not care to be involved within Afghanistan. The less exposure, the less attention.
Right. Thank you so much, Mariam Wardak, speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me quickly go back to Michael Kugelman. Michael, given what we have on the ground, now, of course, there's going to be the next administration coming in. Give me your sense of how optimistic you are. I mean, they're going to not veer away from the course that has been set, but they'll probably tweak it here and there. Is that something that you think is likely to work?
Well, as you suggested, I think the incoming administration will take a very similar position to Afghanistan that the outgoing administration has, and that's to support the peace process in place, but really to focus on how to effect a responsible withdrawal. I think that, President-elect Biden wants to get out of Afghanistan just as much as Trump did. He had been a vocal opponent of his own boss's troop surge back when he was vice president to Barack Obama.
Correct.
So I don't think we should expect much different. He may initially try to tie future U.S. withdrawals to to visible indications that the Taliban is reducing violence, but I'm not even sure it'll go that far. But bottom line is this administration has been unable to do much in terms of planning on Afghanistan policy, just because it's claimed, or the next National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has claimed that the Department of Defense has not been working with this incoming administration on sharing information about Afghanistan. So it's going to have to look to these issues only when it actually assumes office in a few weeks.
So you would agree that the situation is dismal?
Unfortunately, it does. I'm very concerned, and of course, it's really the Afghans that we have to be most concerned about because they will bear the brunt. America has the luxury of being geographically distant, but it's obviously the Afghans that will bear the brunt if this violence is not reined in.
Absolutely. And I'm also concerned about Pakistan because Pakistan's own security is intrinsically linked up with Afghanistan. But thank you so much. That was Michael Kugelman speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.